Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rhonda Pringle, Market President and Publisher of the Baltimore Business Journal. Welcome to the follow-up discussion of last week's fireside chat between BBJ's Editor-in-Chief, Joanna Sullivan, and renowned urbanist Richard Florida. A quick overview on today's program. We do not have direct chat, so please feel free to comment via our question panel, and our event staff will share your post. To tag us on social media, please use hashtag BaltBizEvents. In the handout section of the control panel, you can download our event packet, which contains information on our panelists and our presenting sponsor, the Howard Hughes Corporation. For more about presenting sponsor, Howard Hughes Corporation, I'll turn it over to President and CEO, Greg Fidget. Greg.
Thank you, Rhonda. On behalf of the Howard Hughes Corporation, we're pleased to sponsor the Future of Cities panel discussion, following up on last week's conversation with renowned urbanist Richard Florida. The past year has been a tough time for everyone, and especially tough for urban places. Not only have people suffered from the absence of street life and dining and social activity, which are the lifeblood of a city, but our very society has been exposed as fractured. But as Professor Florida said, there is reason for optimism. Cities, whether newer cities like Columbia, created by Jim Rouse back in the 1960s, where today we are creating a new urban core in the Meriwether district, or cities like Baltimore with rich histories that date back more than 300 years, cities will always be integral to the social and cultural and economic life of humans. We're beginning to see light emerging, but the impact of the pandemic has been profound, as has the Black Lives Matter movement. These forces will affect us and our cities in ways that are not yet completely clear. But one thing is certain: everything in the future will be seen through the lens of health and safety and equity. The need for change is clear. Our physical environment is evolving to meet the needs of a new generation. The purpose and function of the office will surely change after this massive forced work-from-home experiment. In Columbia, we're already meeting the demands for inspired and flexible, connected new work environments. In the future, the office will need to become even more a place to draw the best and brightest out of our home offices and into places where we can connect and collaborate and create with our colleagues. Columbia was designed to be an intentionally inclusive place where everyone would be welcome, regardless of race, religion, or economic status. And founder Jim Rouse created the physical designs and enforced the anti-discrimination policies that ensured this inclusivity. We at Howard Hughes value these founding principles and have never found them more relevant than today. At Meriwether District, we're building a ground-up neighborhood built with culture and commerce in mind and fostering a place to grow people and ideas. It's a challenging time, and we will be grappling with the issues that rose to new prominence in 2020 for years to come. But lucky for us, the BBJ has assembled some of the most informed leaders in Baltimore to share their thoughts on these pressing matters. So thank you, Rhonda and Melody, and all the team at the Baltimore Business Journal for putting this event together. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Greg. The Howard Hughes Corporation has been at the forefront of creating sustainable live-work communities like downtown Columbia in Howard County. I have here with me Karen Cherry, Vice President of Office Leasing with the Howard Hughes Corporation, to tell us a bit more about what the future holds for downtown Columbia, especially as we look ahead post-pandemic. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you for having me, Rhonda.
My first question to you is, why is aligning with the future of cities conversation important to Howard Hughes and specifically downtown Columbia?
So if Columbia were an incorporated city, it would be the third largest city in the region behind DC and Baltimore. So as the Howard Hughes Corporation is redeveloping downtown Columbia into that true urban hub, we are emerging as the third city. And I think that a lot of the challenges that cities are struggling with in the COVID and post-COVID environment are things that Columbia is grappling with as well. And so, listening in on the conversation with Richard Florida last week was really important to us, and being a part of the discussion is important as well, because we feel like as we become the third city, there are things that we have a unique opportunity to do in the planning phases where some other cities are having to rethink how they handle some of these challenges.
So last week, you referenced the Richard Porter conversation that we had. We heard from him. He's a renowned urbanist. He had a lot to say about how cities will need to respond post-pandemic. And one of the things he mentioned was that this will change the way cities compete, that it's less about where people work and more about where they want to live. So how are you addressing this shift in your development of downtown Columbia?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you to the Business Journals for putting on such an amazing discussion. I think Joanna Sullivan did a masterful job with the questions that she put forth to Richard Florida. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective about cities across the country and how they're handling challenges. So specifically to the question that you asked about the workforce, Columbia is well positioned. So Columbia already has a great workforce. We're consistently rated one of the top cities to live in the country. And when you look at the talent base that's already there, Columbia and downtown Columbia already have those things that draw people to live there. So when Richard Florida was talking about attracting the workforce, I was cheering because Columbia has consistently been rated as a top place to live because of our great school systems and the green space, as well as having those opportunities for the urban amenities in the hub that we're building in downtown Columbia.
So he talked a lot about the cities that are poised to thrive. What do cities have to get right to thrive post-pandemic, in your opinion?
So one of the things I loved that he said in particular, and I wrote this quote down, so I'm going to read it. In order to attract the talent, you have to be a great place with a great story. And I thought that quote was really powerful. So I think that when all cities are thinking about what does it look like post-pandemic, you have to really embrace the true meaning of what that quote says. So you have to be a great place with a great story. And he even referenced like a waterfront as an example. So if you think about Baltimore in particular with the waterfront and the Inner Harbor and this true gem that we have in Baltimore, that's our story. And we really need to focus around that story of that lifestyle with the waterfront. Now, when you're talking about a different kind of city like downtown Columbia, our story is a little bit different. So our story is about culture and commerce. So we have this great gem of Merriweather Post Pavilion. And so the story that we're building in downtown Columbia is really surrounding the gems that we have, the gems with Merriweather Post Pavilion, with the culture, and then again, all of our connections to nature with the lakefront and the walking trails and all of the different things that we can offer to both residents and office employees.
So Karen, I have one last question before we turn it over to our panel. Richard Florida is bullish about the growth of cities post-pandemic, especially those that offer great amenities. What is your take on the kinds of cities that will see significant growth?
So again, I go back to what I just stated about the natural gems that cities have to offer. So when you think about downtown Columbia and the gem that I mentioned with Merriweather Post Pavilion, the things that we're trying to do in our development are really embracing that amenity and making that amenity the centerpiece of everything that we do around it. So we're putting together synergistic events like Books in Bloom and Artists in Residence that really take advantage of all of the great things that the culture of Merriweather brings to the area, and then takes that to a different level and brings in different experiences for the community. And that way, cities like downtown Columbia, when you take an amenity base that you already have and then build on that, it only makes it that much more powerful and that much more interesting to both the residents. And then when, as Richard Florida so masterfully said, when the residents are there, the workforce is there, that's what's going to draw the employers. And so the employers will follow and they'll fill up all of these buildings that are being built around this great masterpiece we have with Merriweather Post Pavilion.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you to the Howard Hughes Corporation for their support of today's panel discussion. Now I will turn over to the BBJ's commercial real estate reporter, Melody Simmons, to get our discussion started. Thanks again, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Welcome to the Baltimore Business Journal's Future of Baltimore panel. It's a follow-up discussion to last week's fireside chat between BBJ Editor-in-Chief Joanna Sullivan and urbanist Richard Florida. We heard Richard's view on cities, big and small, across the nation, and his vision of how they will reset post-COVID. We're bringing that national conversation home to Baltimore today. We have asked some local experts to join us and share their perspectives about what the city and its surrounding suburbs need to do to thrive and grow post-pandemic. It involves innovation, resiliency, and a joint effort by all jurisdictions to move on. Joining me today are Daraius Irani, Applied Research Chief Economist at the Regional Economic Studies Institute at Towson University. Seema Iyer, Director of the Jacob France Institute and an Assistant Professor at the University of Baltimore. Millie, Executive Director of the nonprofit Live Baltimore. Shelonda Stokes, President of the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore. And Colin Tarbert, CEO of the Baltimore Development Corporation. I'd like to start by asking the same question to all the panelists. It's been 11 months since COVID-19 rocked our worlds. I'd like to ask each of you, how does Baltimore come out of this? How does the city reset and move forward? Let's start with Shelonda.
Thank you so much, Melody, for having us today. This is an amazing topic, and coming off of Richard Florida, it's one that I think is important to us all. You know from covering our State of Downtown report that downtown has had its sort of ups and downs, particularly during the last recession, but overall is that in these past decade, and that a number of residents and jobs and investments all grew. My prediction is in the next 10 years, we'll be at the same place, but we have to get there, right? And so when you look at what the Congressional Budget Office talked about with the economy coming back, mid-year this year, but knowing that it'll be a slower return for workers, for retail, and for some of those other things, part of what I know is that we have to be both realistic and aspirational about what this means and what this looks like for us moving forward. We know people aren't going to immediately feel comfortable coming back into a crowded office environment, but people are also starting to feel the effects of Zoom fatigue and what happens to a company culture when they're not there and stuff. And so, looking at where things are going, I think for Baltimore in particular, we know that we have to be really intentional about designing what the future of our city looks like. And by intentional, I mean we have to really take into account the vacancies and how we start to fill those vacancies. We have to take into account that not all of our businesses have been able to benefit from the, traditional sort of PPP and how we create opportunities for their growth and success along the way. And so we know things will be a little bit different, but as long as collectively we're able to get in this thing together, we do see sort of the turning around of our city.
Great. Colin, how does Baltimore reset? From where you sit, what can the city do at this point?
Yeah, thanks for having us on. And, I think Baltimore, I think we have the chance to come out of the COVID even stronger than we went in, to be honest with you. There's a lot of things playing into our favor. And we've seen, about 20% of the economy in terms of jobs affected, mainly in our hospitality, our tourism industry for sure. But there's a lot of strengths in Baltimore as well. So we're seeing local manufacturers producing medical equipment related to COVID. We're seeing biomanufacturing actually producing the vaccine here. And so I think we have the opportunity to build off of those strengths. And hopefully, we have a relatively quick recovery in terms of those jobs that we've seen impacted, which I think are going to be temporary. That may not be the case for everything. But I think once people do get the vaccine and, as Shelonda said, feel safe coming back to work, we'll see the restaurant and the tourism business pick right back up. So I feel pretty confident that, we're going to come out of this strong, and again, have the opportunity to grow. I think Richard Florida talked a lot about those second tier, mid-tier cities, and I think Baltimore fits right in that opportunity zone.
Yeah, Seema, I know we talked earlier, and what are some of the nuts and bolts that Baltimore's going to need to move forward?
Well, yes, thanks again for having us here. And it's such a great question because I think it means different things to different people. And one of the things that I think we're finding is that Baltimore is nothing if not resilient. It's a very resilient city. We have come out of kind of crises before. And one of the things that Richard Florida talks about is that this pandemic represents an accelerant of things that probably were in the works anyway. And this is kind of forcing our hand. And in that sense, that's actually a good thing for Baltimore. It's like a paradigm shift of the things that we have to focus on. We're focusing on digital equity. Everybody's focusing on digital equity, which used to be kind of like a fringe topic 2 or 3 years ago, but now we all know it's so critical for everyone to be able to get access to the internet. And so coming out of this, one of the biggest things that I hope is that we are going to be a digitally equitable city that is prepared to do the kinds of things that Richard Florida is talking about, attracting businesses that need good technology. That's the kind of city we need to be anyway. Attracting remote workers to actually live and work in the city of Baltimore, no matter where they work. That's what we're going to need. And focusing on digital equity, I think, is something that we jumped right at doing. And I think that's actually one of the most critical things that we're going to get out of this pandemic.
Daraius, you had some regional ideas. What about Baltimore moving forward? What's your thoughts on it in a broad perspective?
So I'm very bullish on Baltimore. Baltimore, has been around 200 plus years, several depressions, recessions, wars. It's here. We have location, right? So we're on the Inner Harbor. We have beautiful vistas, and we have a vibrant history. And we are the center of Maryland. Baltimore City is the center of Maryland. It's got the ports, it's got the major infrastructure, it's got the arts and entertainment. I mean, no one outside Maryland knows about Timonium or Towson for that matter. Everyone knows about Baltimore. So really, Baltimore is the centerpiece. And what Seema said, digital equity, so important and so relevant now, because that's going to be our key to attract, retain new technology workers. Because again, the city has so much to offer in terms of lifestyle, opportunities, that it's just really, I would say a diamond in the rough still. I think there's an opportunity here to remake a little bit. One of the biggest challenges I find for the city is transportation within the city. Going from east to west, north to south is difficult and timely. So getting individuals to be able to work in various parts of the city are so critical. But I think the city has, I'm very optimistic and very bullish on the city. It is the center of Maryland. And really, without the city, Maryland doesn't really look like Maryland. It looks like any other, place. But so Baltimore is unique. It's fantastic. And again, outside of Maryland, no one really knows the rest of Maryland. Everyone knows Baltimore, Ravens, and Orioles.
That is true. And Annie's so familiar with that. Annie, you're really the boots on the ground. You're hyper local, and you have your finger on the pulse of the city. Talk a little bit about where Baltimore goes from here, from your perspective.
Well, thank you, Melody. I was so excited to hear Richard Florida talk about the future of cities, because he hit on so many points that make me feel confident that this is truly Baltimore's moment to shine. He talked about cities where it's affordable to live. He talked about cities with waterfronts, college towns, cities where there are neighborhoods where people can live and work around thriving main streets and in little micro areas. And what doesn't describe Baltimore in that list? We are an affordable city where we have unique homes, unique neighborhoods. We have convenience to jobs. We have convenience up and down the East Coast, and when travel allows again, to Europe, that other parts of our country can't offer. We have tight-knit communities where neighbors know one another. And truly, living here gives you the opportunity to see your values reflected back in your neighbors and in your housing choice. So, what could be better? What could be a better starting place for a city than what we have here in Baltimore?
Right, indeed. And I know, Shelonda, you've talked a lot about restarting the downtown. It seems that might echo out kind of like ripples in a pond when, when the time comes, if downtown can jumpstart. Talk about some of the plans that you have that will move Baltimore into the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And in listening to, I think, some of the other panelists, what you see is the energy that I feel, the excitement of downtown, but as the heart of our city. To that point, we know that we needed to be vibrant. And so part of what we recognized in downtown, and some of this was pre-COVID, but, as Seema mentioned, I think the accelerant of COVID helped with some of the vacancies that you started to see in our downtown. And so one of the initiatives, or one of the things that we're looking at, we just launched, is our Boost initiative that sort of touches on all of the pieces that we've been talking about today. And that is a program, it stands for Black Owned and Operated Storefront Tenancy. And it was about us being very intentional, not only about filling those vacant spaces that are opening, helping create, a walkable downtown, increasing safety and all of that, but it's also layering on our responsibility around racial equity and what that means. And in this program, it's creating an opportunity for those businesses to, we're giving them, in addition to financial resources, up to $50,000 in that, right, but also the technical support, marketing, and all of those things, so that they could help make our downtown vibrant, but also give people something to want to come back downtown to. And so it's those types of things, I think, that Richard Florida also talked about. People have a choice on where they want to live, where they want to be, where they want to work, with the ability for this remote living. And so we want to expand that ability and capacity for people to bring new things into downtown and to give people a reason to come back and be excited about it.
That's great. And I know that there's some great energy and that you're hearing from these property owners. Talk about that. They do have vacancies, but they're eager to fill them and give new opportunity. This seems like a great breath of fresh air at this time.
Thank you. And you're right. It's interesting because, when you have these sort of brainstorms of ideas that you think are it's only validated once people start to support it. And so we put it out there as an idea initially. And I can tell you the thought was to start out with a cohort of maybe 5 properties so that we could test, and pilot this. We've had an overwhelming response from the business community and the retail community for a couple reasons. One, we have people, to the point that was made, that people recognize systemic racism existed and they're willing to do their part to help fill that void. That's one part. The second thing is, we know that vacancy isn't good for anybody. And so this is at a place in time where I think, unlike any other time in my lifetime, I feel like all of the areas are working together to solve the problem. I think, Richard Florida mentioned PPP being that public, that private and philanthropic. It is, to me, the best time ever for all of those things to come into play.
Definitely. I know, Colin, talk a little bit about the Baltimore Development Corporation. You had the grant program this year or last year to help existing businesses survive. And I'm wondering how that might help in resetting the table for the future, going off of some of the new businesses that Shelonda just talked about. What is Baltimore going to look like with all these efforts going on?
Sure. As you mentioned, Baltimore Development Corporation, for the last 11 months, we've totally changed almost our whole organizational framework and our operations to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've issued 3 rounds of small business grants, 1,000 grants total. We have another grant round that we'll be launching later this week, again geared towards restaurants. But really, we've been focused on our small local businesses, and we've also been focused on the most vulnerable businesses. So focusing, as Shelonda said, on our Black-owned businesses, on other minority-owned businesses, to make sure that they got the help first, as opposed to, oftentimes they're left out or they get the help too late. And so, we've seen, as it was mentioned before, resiliency. So a lot of the small businesses are making it through. It's not easy by any stretch, and the longer the pandemic goes on, the more concerned that we get. But I think the help that we have received and the help that we've been able to get out on the street has helped small businesses, weather this storm. And hopefully, as the vaccine, rolls out, we'll be able to ensure that those businesses stay in business and are successful. So I think moving forward, though, what are we looking at, post-pandemic? How do we continue to grow our city? Baltimore development, we're working on a 5-year strategic plan with lots of different partners. Just probably about everybody on this panel today knows about Baltimore Together, which we recently put up a public website. So now you can go to www.baltimoretogether.com and read our interim report, which highlights some of the findings that we've researched, as well as a response to COVID. And what we're working towards is a 5-year strategic plan that we hope to finish this summer to really focus on Baltimore's future economy.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because Richard Florida talked a lot about Baltimore being in that group of mid-sized cities that are competing against each other now for resources, for talent, for business development. Where does Baltimore fit in with that, and how competitive do you see it right now?
Well, I mean, Baltimore's competing with everybody, and we of course want to be, number one. I think Baltimore's, we're succeeding in a lot of areas. So we do have a rich pool of talent. We're close to the federal government, so we have a significant amount of highly educated workforce members. We're the I think we're the 8th most educated, region in the U.S. And Baltimore's population, and certainly Annie can talk about our population and our growth strategy. What we're seeing in terms of the trends that we're seeing: younger, more educated, more economically mobile residents in our city, and I think that lends very well to economic growth. So in terms of us competing, I think we're right up there at the top. We're also, able to attract people from the West Coast. I think maybe as a result of COVID, and Richard talked a little bit about this, people leaving some of these very expensive, denser cities like a New York, and finding a great home in Baltimore where it's affordable. They can still find a job in a competitive industry with a competitive salary, but have a better life in terms of being able to afford more and do more.
Annie, I know you just put the study out. Colin mentioned a little bit of some of the issues that the study just found. Talk a little bit about the heavy lift of trying to repopulate the city. We haven't received the census figures yet, so what we're looking at is a potential another drop in population. I think everybody's expecting that. And, what will it take to get the city moving again for residency? I know that the city's image is always discussed, and this is something that you're fighting against. Talk a little bit about that challenge.
Well, thank you, Melody, because we're so excited to talk about the study that we just released, and also the companion study that BDC released at the same time, focused on growing the city's population. I mean, we know that growing the city's population is absolutely critical to achieve the future city that we're all here talking about today. Residents contribute the great majority of Baltimore City's general fund revenue, so they really are what allow our city to operate. As Colin mentioned, residents are our talent pool, and so businesses are going to be attracted here based on the folks who are choosing to live here. Residents support businesses and tens of thousands of jobs, and those are neighborhood businesses, so jobs that are located in the community, and they're truly the fabric of our neighborhoods and of our city. And so, how do we achieve that growth? Well, we worked with a national researcher last year to take a look at our city's residential market potential. And I would say in a nutshell, what they came back with is, if we build it, they will come. The study found that if we could add up to 7,000 additional housing units each year here in Baltimore City, and if we were to have those units available, that those units could be filled by new households that would be adding to the population of our city. So, we've talked about momentum. There's a lot of momentum to build on here in Baltimore, but we need to literally build on that momentum and create housing that's going to serve a great diversity of residents. We know that those residents are going to be of diverse incomes. We know that there's going to need to be affordable housing included in that plan. But there's also a great opportunity to develop market rate housing, and again, housing to meet the needs of everybody who's out there shopping. I'm sure we'll talk at some point today about what's going on with the housing numbers, but we just came off of this great year for housing in the region and in Baltimore City as well. And we saw that the inventory rebounded in our surrounding counties and not so much here in Baltimore. So we need to have the housing available so that we can attract the residents so that we can see our city grow.
That's great. Let's back it up just a little bit. Daraius, talk about the region itself. Where does Baltimore fit in to the region, and where does the city and its surrounding jurisdictions, where does it go from here towards a better future coming out of the pandemic?
So there's a multitude of sort of questions in there, but so obviously as the city goes, so does the region. So it's critical. Many of the individuals who work in the city live in the county and kind of commute across the lines. So that's going to be critical. So those finance jobs are typically here in Baltimore City. In the long term, this event perhaps afforded some opportunities to sort of rethink the city, both in terms of equity, housing equity. Oftentimes we see the butterfly effect in downtown, the old redlining portions. Those housing areas need to be seriously addressed in terms of transportation, job opportunities. The lack of hope sometimes is sometimes some of the precursor to some of the challenges the city faces. But also transportation networks really need to be beefed up because we shouldn't all have to have a car to get to work. And many times, many people don't have cars. So, I think this pandemic has sort of accelerated some trends. But, I think sitting back and thinking about how can we remake the city and the region to be a place where basically people can, live and enjoy some of the cultural amenities without having to sort of, take 6 buses and 3 transfers to get down to some place. Understanding that's a very expensive proposition, but I think we really need to think about integrating the city more holistically in terms of its transportation networks. We cannot be a city that relies solely on cars to get around. And we really need to really do a massive change in our mass transit systems that sort of allow individuals to get to work in timely fashion. So I would say out of this sort of pandemic crisis comes opportunities. And, again, with some, federal stimulus money, some infrastructure spending, I think we have an opportunity to really remake the city in terms of what it looks like. I think to Shelonda's point, I think it's critical that we address the racial inequities that have occurred historically in our city, not just in the downtown district, but across many of our neighborhoods that have sort of remained underinvested and have continued to be underinvested, and as a result have fallen sort of into disrepair and has sort of in some sense fueled some of the images the city has faced. I mean, this is really sometimes, I hate to sound sort of, superficial, but in some sense, there is a communications issue, right? I mean, imagery issue of Baltimore. Everyone sees the wonderful Miracle Mile around the Baltimore Stadium, but once you start going north of that, you lose less of it. And tragically, that's where the bulk of the population, lives and works. But we really need to address that issue, that issue of inequity that is so pervasive in our city historically.
Seema, I know that you guys have done a lot of research at the Institute, and what do you see that Baltimore needs and, to really jumpstart it and get it going for the next decade?
I mean, Daraius just teed it up perfectly to have a conversation about neighborhoods, right? I oversee a project called the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance at the Jacob Frantz Institute, and we are tracking quality of life in all of our neighborhoods all the time. And quality of life seems like also kind of a quaint little thing to be talking about, but Richard Florida said that is the most important thing we need to be making sure is adequate in all of our neighborhoods, because we need those great outdoor spaces. We need those places where people can commune together, but outside. So great streets, great parks, great bike routes, great basketball courts, great tennis courts. These may seem like luxury items right now, but they are absolutely critical for us to be investing in. And if you think about the price tag on these kinds of things are actually not that expensive, and yet part of kind of the routine critical maintenance for the city to do. But focusing in on that now so that our neighborhoods have a chance to come outside, meet their neighborhoods safely, and actually communicate and get to see each other, because right now it's such an isolating experience for so many people. So focusing in on those great neighborhood-based amenities, which, in the grand scale of how much things cost, are actually not that expensive. Let's go repave all our tennis courts right now, and let's make sure all of our basketball courts are ready for children to play in, because that's what's going to cause great quality of life, and that's actually what's going to attract the next set of people to come to Baltimore, because they can see community, because otherwise right now we're all held up in our houses. And so really focusing in on those simple things that create quality of life in our neighborhoods is actually something that we measure, that I think is such an important thing that we focus on right now. And tracking the data, you can see what every neighborhood cares about. We have people that don't have street lights in some of our neighborhoods. Well, we could fix that now, right? That's the kind of stuff that we can do. General maintenance and making sure that we have the things that allow people to come outside so that we have better quality of life in all of our neighborhoods.
Perfect. Colin, I'm wondering about the fiscal aspect, some of the challenges the city might be facing, particularly in the next year or two, because of the economic impact of the virus on revenue. We're seeing it already in the closing of the budget from last year, and also in the beginning of the planning for this year. What do you think public and private resources can do, and how important is it that they team up to get the city out of this rut and into future planning and movement?
Yeah, I'm certainly not the finance department, so I can't give you the exact impact of the budget. But I think anytime you have significant,
you have an idea about the hits. The hits are bad.
Yeah, the hits aren't going to be great. I think we may see similar deficits as we saw the last time when we had the Great Recession, on maybe not quite as impacted. But as we said, that COVID-19, the economic impact hasn't been uniform. It's actually been very kind of acute here and there. And so where we saw the hit in particular with the city was on its tourism aspect. So you're going to see a significant hotel tax reduction. You're going to see parking revenue down. To a certain extent, you may see income tax down. But again, the economic impact has been, frankly, more on the frontline workers, the service workers, lower wage workers. And so all that is going to impact the city's budget. I think for us, though, whether that's a 1 year or 2 year hit, we'll see, and we'll adapt. And we've had to go through these times before, and we'll work on it. I think what's really critical is when we come out, what BDC is doing, what the city's doing, again, to support our small businesses, and what the private sector can do to support our small businesses. You ask sort of what's the public-private response, and I think that's a focus that we need to really protect in terms of our small local neighborhoods, because as Seema talked about community, the tennis court's one thing, but so is the neighborhood restaurant, and that sense of community. And so making sure that we support those, and the private sector has a role to play in that too. It can't just be on the shoulders of government, especially local government, because as you said, I think we're going to be going through our own impact. We tend to lag. So the private sector and the small businesses are getting hit in 2020 and 2021, and then the city's budget will get hit back a year or two later. So I think focusing on supporting our small local owned businesses, hopefully the banks and other lenders are having some flexibility with their terms. I know we at Baltimore Development Corporation, we do a number of small business loans, and of course we have a loan pool, and we've been working with all of our clients and customers to be as flexible as possible to make sure that first and foremost they focus on paying their expenses and paying their employees.
Shelonda, I know that there's a lot of vacancy downtown. There's a lot of concern about restocking some of that office space and moving forward. Of course, you have some of the suburban areas building urban-like developments. And so there's a lot of competition out there. If you could talk about Baltimore's elevator pitch, what is it these days for now and for the next year or two coming forward?
No, thank you. I think if you go with that motto of imitation being the best form of flattery, you're right in looking at what's happening surrounding our city and how I think a lot of the suburban areas are trying to urbanize kind of what they have. What Baltimore has that nobody else has is at its core. Everybody is still coming here to go to an Orioles or Ravens game. You're still coming here for entertainment and museums and culture. The connectedness of what you get in our city is what people want. They just want to touch it from afar and be able to sort of go back and get it. One of the things that I love about being a city resident, we endured snow earlier in the week, the ability to walk to work regardless in here. And so I think Baltimore offers, the city life offers what a suburban life can only sort of dream about in that way and try to create in sort of a small, in its own sort of way of trying to give a taste of what we have to offer. And so I think that in itself sort of sells itself. Part of what I think we as a city are also, we recognize, and Melody, that we've recently engaged in a economic development survey, also to kind of figure out what are those things that would be attractive to our businesses, our real estate professionals. And people think about downtown only as sort of the business district, but we have just in our core nearly 8,000 residents who call downtown, this part of downtown, home. And so we're trying to find out what are those things that people want, they need, to partner with Annie and Colin to make sure that we are, teaming together to make sure holistically we're answering the call to how we ensure that the attractiveness of downtown is prevalent to all.
That's true. And Seema, you talked a little bit about the broadband, the need to increase the broadband. How will that move Baltimore forward in this age of reset? Will it attract more tech jobs? Will it bring more industry? How will it impact the whole city and the residents who live here?
It runs the gamut of all of that, plus being able to really close the gap. We have some neighborhoods that have 40% of the households before the pandemic did not have access to the internet. And this is the environment where the children were trying to learn in, or people were trying to work from home in. And that kind of divide where people are either on the internet or not is something that is just not sustainable into the future. So closing that gap, which we talked about, is something that we're all working on vigorously right now, is a way to make sure that children are not left behind. The education system can keep teaching children, that businesses that need tech, whether or not they're on the main street or off the main street, have access to the kinds of resources technologically that they need to both stay in business right now and then grow once the pandemic is over. Really addressing that is going to be about making sure our children are okay in the future, our educational system, these are our future workers, and then not left behind so that they can actually take on the jobs of the future and that we don't consider this a gap year, because we can't afford that as a city, or as children can't afford that as a life. And that's kind of why focusing in on digital equity is such a critical component right now.
And Annie, I think if you look historically and read history about the city and where it fits in with the region, Baltimore is resilient. And I wanted to hear your take on it. Why is Baltimore so resilient, and define the resiliency here?
Well, I think Baltimore's resilient for a lot of reasons. I mean, I hit on some of these points before. I mean, we're an incredibly affordable city. And you hear right now, I mean, there's so much in the news, especially earlier in the pandemic, about people fleeing cities. Well, they aren't fleeing cities. They're fleeing places that are unaffordable and where the cost of living is really too high to sustain what people are looking for in their quality of life. So, here in Baltimore, we have the benefit of being an incredibly affordable city. Again, we have these unique homes. We have the bulk of the historic homes in the state of Maryland, certainly in the region. We have waterfront, miles of waterfront, and we also have waterfront within our neighborhoods. I mean, you're very familiar, as I am, with Lake Montebello. We have waterfront, inland lake waterfront properties that people can live on. We're convenient, as I said earlier, but our communities are tight knit. I mean, this is a place where people know our neighbors. I think Seema mentioned people feeling isolated in the pandemic. It is very typical that you hear from city residents that they haven't felt isolated during this time because their communities have come together. We have a neighbor here where I live who organized a Sunday concert outside on different people's blocks every single weekend over the summer. We had a lantern parade in the dead of winter, and everybody was outside, watching people safely from their porches as this lantern parade went by. And again, this is a place where we don't just tolerate diversity, we celebrate diversity, we expect it. And I think that as more people are really confronting, this conscious consumerism, how are they making decisions? Where are they putting their dollars? Are they spending with a Black-owned business, with a local business, or are they, spending with a national business? Well, people are beginning to make those same kinds of decisions about where they live. And, I think investing in Baltimore is investing in something that benefits so many people, not just ourselves. And so I think all those things coming together add to the reason that we're such a resilient city. And again, why I think we have such a bright future.
Sounds good. Of course, there are some challenges. The city does have the image issue, the crime issue. These are something we can't ignore. And we don't want to gloss over it because I do think it has some impact on decisions for businesses and also for residents too. Daraius, how can the city overcome some of these challenges to its image to move forward for a better future?
This is, oftentimes, all cities have crime. So, let's keep on, keep on sort of citing Baltimore as only having crime. All big cities tend to have crime. It's, it is what it is. You don't want to, you want to minimize it, but I think one of the fundamental things is really providing opportunities for many of the youth to be able to engage in the economy long term, and that's everything from trade schools, colleges, universities, all kinds of things run the gamut. We cannot sort of keep on sort of dismissing that's crime. It's a city. Crime happens in all cities, and we need to figure out how to better manage it. And again, it's through community policing. It's through sort of some of the approaches that are sort of that we haven't tried in the past. Really thinking about broadly, how do we address some of the social inequities that have occurred historically, generation after generation, and address those and provide opportunities for many of the individuals in the city. It cannot be emphasized enough. To Seema's point, digital equity is so critical. It's not just sort of that we'll attract tech workers. It's actually having the level playing field to ensure that we're able to even be able to be in business going forward. All the government services now are online. We saw in the pandemic, people learning from home without access to high-speed digital, facilities, Wi-Fi. Our kids are not going to be able to compete, in the 21st or 22nd century. And so that's one of the things we really need to address that opportunities. Again, transportation is a critical aspect. It shouldn't take you 90 minutes from anywhere in Baltimore to get to Amazon. You should really think about sort of being able to sort of address that. But crime is something that occurs in all major cities. And again, having sort of progressive policing, community-based policing, kind of help address those things at the core. And again, it really is about providing opportunities to many of the individuals. Baltimore has some great assets to the question of resiliency. We have 16 major universities, in the region. We have, some of the best hospitals in the world. We have, universities on campus in the city, from UB, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, Baltimore. It's just amazing the assets we have and how attractive those assets are. But again, part of this is also, and I would say, falls to Brandon, Mayor Scott. He's got to figure out how to make his team lead and have ethics in leading. I think we've seen some missteps by the administration that has allowed things to happen. In past administrations that have allowed things to happen with policing that have sort of given residents a very bad taste about the police.
I think that that's very positive. I also think if you look in all the areas of the city, there's activity going on. There's great development on the east side and the west side. Look at Lexington Market and the downtown area. We're hearing the super block may start up again. And so that's going to be a big catalyst for that part of the area. And of course, let's not forget Penn Station. That's going to be a big connector point. We've talked about transportation today, and as soon as Penn Station adds that high-speed rail line in the coming 5 years, it's going to be a game changer up there. This has been a great discussion. I want to just wrap it up with one question for all the panelists again to close it out. Where do we go from here? What do you see? Where do we go from here? Is it baby steps? Do we take medium steps or giant leaps? Daraius, what do you think?
So I would go with giant leaps. Really think about, put a big vision of what Baltimore City and the region can be post-COVID 10 years from now. That'll then help us develop a plan to get there year by year. Do we need to seek federal aid for additional infrastructure spending? Do we need to seek private partnerships to get more Wi-Fi across the entire city? It should be the case that we should be able to walk into any place that had just strong Wi-Fi. So basically, you walk seamlessly downtown through the midtown without having to worry about coverage. But I think definitely a 10-year vision of where Baltimore needs to be, and then how do we get there?
Great. Seema, what do you think? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think one of the things that Richard Florida said at the very end of his talk was how in the United States, we are not a top-down type of country. We are very much a ground up. And this is exactly what Baltimore is good at. We are so good at bringing people into the conversation, being collaborative, rolling up our sleeves and getting to work. This is a pandemic that none of us have ever experienced, but only all of us together are going to figure out how to get out of it. And this is a kind of investment in our future that I think you can hear just from all of our voices, that we are ready to do that kind of work and help make sure that the investment comes so that we can combat some of the image and crime issues that we might have. Everything that Colin, Shelonda, Annie are doing to set the stage for that kind of investment, they have partners in all of us to make sure that we can do this as a city. The new administration, I think, is really rolling up its sleeve as well and making sure that we have the ability to collaborate. So bringing people into the conversation, making sure we're all involved and have buy-in into that future, that's what we're good at, and that's what we're going to do.
That sounds great. Colin, I see that on your board when you have your board meetings. There's a great diversity on the board and a lot of focus and concern about that there is equitable distribution of opportunity. Where does Baltimore go from here with the help of your board?
Sure. Well, to answer the first question you had, is was it small steps or big steps? Make no small plans, as Daniel Burnham said, to quote a different urbanist. And so I'm very much in the mindset of you got to think big. And I think, as Annie said, this is Baltimore's moment. And I hope that, we're going to take that giant leap forward as opposed to an incremental step. And we're working on that now, as Seema said, bringing everyone together. That's the concept around Baltimore together. And we're setting some North Stars. So we're talking about, how we can be the cancer diagnostic capital of the world. We're talking about how Baltimore can be showcased as the social innovation capital of the world. And I think supporting that is this really rich asset that we've completely overlooked, which is really our diversity. And now we're making a strong commitment to that. So you'll see that in the Baltimore Together report, a very firm stance on racial equity. But you'll also see it as an opportunity and an asset that we're now celebrating, as opposed to something that, frankly, has been dismissed or looked at almost even negatively. And so, raising up the Baltimoreans that, haven't had an opportunity, that haven't been part of the Baltimore's economy, I think is what our real opportunity and chances. And I think you're going to see so much innovation come out of tapping our neighborhoods and our existing residents, that people are going to come here. They're going to want to invest. They're going to want to be part of the Baltimore renaissance. And as you said, our board is very diverse. We have people that are, tech savvy. We have construction. We have all different ages and races and gender. And it's exciting to see them come around and support the work that we're doing, both in terms of our COVID response to help the small businesses, as well as, our growing sectors that have supported Baltimore's economy for years.
That's great. Annie, you're kind of the, you're the glue that holds it together because you're so familiar with all the 200 plus neighborhoods and everything that they contribute. Where do you see them fitting in and going, where do we go with all the neighborhoods? They've kind of gotten a little, away from each other. We used to have the city fair. We used to have more cohesiveness. How does that come together for the future?
Well, again, I would agree with my colleagues. I think this is a big moment, and it's a time for a big vision and for big steps. And I think that really starts with valuing our residents. At Live Baltimore, we say that residents are our city's greatest assets, and that is absolutely true. And I think this is truly the moment to embrace that. And I think it's also the moment to really embrace our identity as a majority Black city, to celebrate that, to look to Atlanta, and to think about how can our vision be Baltimore as a place that young Black professionals aspire to start their lives, tapping our HBCUs that are anchoring both sides of our city and making sure that those graduates are getting jobs here, that they're excited to stay here, to start their lives here. I mean, that in and of itself is a big vision. And I think the national conversations that are going on about racial justice and equity, I think that those can only benefit Baltimore because I do think that, I think it's important that we acknowledge that many of the perceptional challenges that Baltimore has faced, those come because of racial prejudice, that we've had to face things as a majority Black city that other cities perhaps have not had to face. And I think, again, really, this is a moment to address those things head on, to be upfront about that, to embrace who we are as a city, and to put that focus on neighborhoods and people. And I think we can do anything if we do that.
That's great. Shelonda, I'm going to give you the last word because you're out there every day. You're in the core of the city. You have a whole crew. You have great plans and great energy. And there's a movement afoot to try to focus on retention of businesses downtown. And this is a very big, important part toward the future. So where do we go from here? Where do you go from here in the partnership?
Thank you so much. This has actually been not only great for us talking about the business piece, but emotional as well. Melanie, many people know I am the ultimate sort of product of the city, and that my first job was cleaning the Inner Harbor. And for many of the sort of disconnected residents that we talk about, at one point you think about a lack of hope, not feeling that you can get to certain levels. And so to be in the position that I am, supported and surrounded by the colleagues here and my board, is an amazing place to have an opportunity to create that kind of impact. We know that the redlining and all of those things created, this sort of dissection of our community where you have workforce as a major challenge. I don't know that many people say, I want to make Baltimore bad. People want to eat. People want to be a part of the system in a good way. And I think a number of the initiatives that we're outlining here help us get there. But more importantly, you see a number of the boards, as you mentioned, and people who are standing up and raising their hands to say, I don't want to just put the money down. I'm willing to invest in the community overall. And that for Downtown Partnership, I'm seeing not only on the board, but I'm seeing in the property owners and the businesses who are saying, help us figure out what we need to do to make our entire city better. We need to make money to be in business, but it's not just about the money. It's about us as an organization. Resiliency doesn't even say it for our city. It's our people. Baltimore people are different. We're different here, and in a good way. And I think that this is something that you'll come to see and feel and believe once we get over this bump.
This is great. I think we've heard some great optimism, some great energy, some great perspectives today. I thank you all for coming on and sharing all your thoughts and your plans and your discussions, your perspectives. I thank everybody for joining us today. Be sure to look for more reporting on the future of cities will be in this week's editions of the Baltimore Business Journal. I'm Melody Simmons, a reporter, and I wish that you stay safe and healthy and stay informed. Thank you.
Thank you.